Picnic at Hanging Rock is a novel by Joan Lindsay, published in 1967. This mysterious atmospheric novel blends genres such as mystery, suspense, pseudo-history, historical fiction, female gothic fiction, and science fiction. Posing as a merger of fact or fiction that the readers must decide for themselves, Picnic at Hanging Rock is an unreliable narration from a third-person omniscient narrator. This novel is set in 1900 and is about 3 girls and a teacher from the Appleyard College, a prestigious fictional boarding school in Mount Macedon, Victoria, Australia, going missing in the Hanging Rock while on a trip. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Picnic at Hanging Rock begins on Valentine's Day. Girls from Appleyard College eagerly get ready for a picnic at Hanging Rock. Mrs. Appleyard, headmistress of Appleyard College, advises them to behave well. Greta McCraw, the mathematics teacher, and Mademoiselle Diane de Poitiers, the French and dancing teacher, accompany them. Mr. Ben Hussey, who owns a local cab company, drives them in a horse-drawn buggy, promising to bring them back by 8 that night. They have a pleasant time at the picnic, enjoying food and tea, and soaking up the sun. Miss McCraw and Mr. Hussey notice his watch has stopped and suggest leaving in an hour to ensure they return on time. Some senior girls, including the beautiful Miranda, the smart Marion Quaid, and the wealthy Irma Leopold, ask permission to explore the base of the rock, which Mademoiselle grants. Edith Wharton, who's not well-liked and is the youngest, pleads to join and Miranda agrees. As they head towards the rock, they encounter another group. The other group is of the wealthy summer residents, Colonel Fitzhubert and Mrs. Fitzhubert, with their nephew Michael and coachman Albert Crendall. At the base, Irma suggests climbing up for a better view. The girls are unaware that Miss McCraw has been following them. Despite Edith feels unwell and urging them to turn back, but the older girls, seemingly entranced, continue barefoot. Edith, terrified, flees down the mountain when they don't heed her calls to return. That evening, Mrs. Appleyard becomes anxious when 8 o'clock passes without the girls' return. Eventually, around 10 p.m., the carriage arrives. Mademoiselle faints, saying something terrible occurred. A maid belonging to the domestic staff of the college, Minnie assists Mademoiselle while Mr. Hussey informs Mrs. Appleyard that Miss McCraw, Miranda, Irma, and Marion are missing. Mr. Hussey's report to Constable Bumper mentions that after Edith's frantic descent down the rock, they realized Miss McCraw was also gone. Despite a search, nothing is found, and Mrs. Appleyard tries to keep the incident quiet. Bumper organizes a search party with the Fitzhuberts, their coachman, many bloodhounds, and an Aboriginal Australian tracker, but it with no results. Media attention increases, causing commotion at the college, where Mrs. Appleyard struggles to maintain order. Bumper takes Edith back to the rock, hoping to trigger her memory. Although Edith can't recall much, she remembers seeing Miss McCraw, without her skirt and only her drawers, going up the rock. Mrs. Appleyard realizes the girls won't return and faces the daunting task of informing their wealthy parents. A week later, as Mike continues to worry about the missing girls, Albert, his newfound companion, suggests they may be lost forever in the wilderness. However, Mike refuses to believe they're gone and decides to conduct his own search, sneaking away from his relative's estate at Lakeview with Albert's support. They set out at dawn towards the rock, but as night approaches, Albert urges them to return. Determined, Mike insists on staying overnight. Albert, concerned, returns to Lakeview alone and assures Colonel Fitzhubert that Mike is safe. At sunrise, Mike resumes his ascent but soon feels drowsy and falls asleep, waking to find himself injured and bleeding. Unconscious, he's discovered by Albert near the rock's base, who rushes for help. Dr. Mackenzie and Albert retrieve Mike, who later awakens with no memory of his ordeal. Albert, curious, finds a cryptic note in Mike's notebook and thinking it to be a clue, alerts Colonel Fitzhubert. With the help of Jim Grant, a policeman, and Dr. Cooling, another doctor, they return to Hanging Rock and discover Irma Leopold, alive and unconscious, near where Mike was found. She's brought back to Lakeview, where she recuperates. When Albert informs Mike of Irma's rescue, Mike, hoping for Miranda's return, becomes withdrawn upon learning it's Irma who's safe. Amid the media frenzy surrounding Irma Leopold's return with headlines like "Girl's Body on Rock, Missing Heiress Found," Mrs. Appleyard attempts to maintain order at the college. But as the public scrutiny intensifies, she resorts to harsher discipline towards the students. Sarah Wayborn, the youngest boarder and an orphan, bears the brunt of Mrs. Appleyard's frustration. Mrs. Appleyard punishes Sarah for her guardian's late payment of tuition by withdrawing her from art class, disregarding Sarah's grief over Miranda's disappearance, her roommate and friend. At Lakeview, Mike and Irma recover fully, yet both lack any recollection of their time on the rock. They develop a friendship, though Irma hopes for romance. She prepares to leave for Europe without resistance from Mike. Before departing, Irma visits Appleyard College to collect her belongings and bid farewell, but her reception turns hostile when the students react with hysterical animosity towards her, forcing her to leave hastily. However, the girls don't remember acting hostile. The distressed Mademoiselle and Miss Lumley decided not to tell Mrs. Appleyard about this incident. Mr. Leopold, Irma's father, uproots Irma from the college, which is distressing to Mrs. Appleyard, who heavily relied on his financial college donations. Sarah, deeply affected by Irma's visit, becomes increasingly unwell and combative, alarming the staff. Miss Lumley asks her brother, Reg, to take her away from the college. They travel to Melbourne and stay at a hotel, but it burns down, resulting in their deaths. As Mike prepares to depart Lakeview, he extends an invitation to Albert to join him. While driving Mike to the train station in town for his journey to Melbourne, an errand boy delivers a letter addressed to Albert. Unable to read cursive, Albert asks Mike to read it aloud. The letter, from Irma's father, expresses gratitude to Albert for saving Irma's life and includes a generous check of £1,000, an amount that exceeds anything Albert has ever possessed. And thus Albert resigns from the Fitzhuberts. Before Easter, Mrs. Appleyard informs Minnie that Mr. Cosgrave, Sarah's guardian, will collect her that day, but instructs Minnie to disregard the doorbell and let Mrs. Appleyard handle the encounter. Later, Mademoiselle expresses concern about Sarah to Mrs. Appleyard, only to be informed that Sarah has left for the term. While assisting a maid in clearing out Sarah and Miranda's vacated room, Mademoiselle discovers Sarah's cherished possession, a miniature portrait of Miranda, left behind. Suspecting foul play, Mademoiselle writes to Bumper, expressing her apprehensions. That night, Mrs. Appleyard, amidst a flashback, visits Sarah's room, suggesting a troubling past interaction with the girl, before returning to bed hastily. Many members of the college staff resign, and there is a noticeable decrease in student enrollment, instigating financial issues at the college. On Thursday, Mrs. Appleyard received a letter from Sarah's guardian that he'll be collecting her from school in 3 days. The following day, while tending to the flowers behind the school, Mr. Whitehead, the gardener, detects a foul odor emanating from a hydrangea bed. Investigating further, he discovers crushed stems and eventually finds Sarah Waybourne's body concealed within the hedge. Despite her disfigured face, Mr. Whitehead recognizes Sarah due to her petite build. He informs Mrs. Appleyard, who reacts with shock and instructs him to prepare a horse and buggy for a trip to the police station. Upon arrival, Mrs. Appleyard requests to be dropped off alone. She then seeks assistance from Ben Hussey, convincing him to drive her towards Hanging Rock under the guise of receiving distressing news from acquaintances nearby. Mrs. Appleyard proceeds alone to Hanging Rock, where she ascends to the summit and experiences a horrifying vision of Sarah's corpse. Overwhelmed with terror, she throws herself off the rock, meeting her demise on the jagged rocks below. A newspaper clipping dated February 14, 1913, reports the destruction of Appleyard College in 1901 by fire, while the mystery surrounding the disappearances at Hanging Rock is unsolved. Although Joan Lindsay's editors omitted the final chapter from her original Picnic at Hanging Rock manuscript, it was later published separately after her death. This chapter divulges a surreal turn of events during Irma, Miranda, and Marian's ascent up Hanging Rock. As they progress, the girls experience a peculiar sensation, witnessing their math teacher, Greta McCraw, transform into a crab-like creature before vanishing into a crevice. Strangely, the girls remove their corsets and toss them over the edge, observing them hang in the air momentarily before following Miss McCraw through the crack. However, when Irma attempts to pass through, the opening seals shut, driving her to temporary insanity. This conclusion suggests the presence of a time warp or wormhole within the rock, reflecting Lindsay's fascination with temporal lapses and Aboriginal Australian beliefs about the rock's sacredness. Let's analyze Picnic at Hanging Rock. The central enigma of Picnic at Hanging Rock remains unsolved as the girls and their math teacher disappear without leaving any tangible evidence behind. None of the individuals present during the afternoon of the vanishings can provide a clear account or fully recollect what occurred. Through shifts in perspective among various characters, Lindsay hints at the mystery's supernatural nature. Several characters experience peculiar occurrences, such as their watches stopping at the rock's base, and the senior girls seemingly compelled by unseen forces to ascend further towards the monolith, apparently in a trance. Edith Horton notices a dark red cloud which scares her. Amidst desperate attempts to unravel the mystery, search parties scour the area, detectives question witnesses, and reporters speculate about kidnappings and murders. Michael Fitzhubert enlists Albert for an independent search. Despite relentless efforts, the truth remains elusive, leading to frustration and dead ends. Edith, the sole witness, appears to have her memory erased by fear and trauma, while Irma Leopold, one of the missing girls, recalls nothing beyond the picnic. Mike lacks memories of his excursion and injury at the Hanging Rock. The picnic at Hanging Rock concludes with a newspaper clipping from 1913, acknowledging the anniversary of the disappearances and admitting the public may never know the cause. Lindsay's editor's decision to end the novel ambiguously indicates the theme of the unknowable, twinning Lindsay's desire for readers to accept the novel's mystique. Hanging Rock retains the secrets of the missing Appleyard women, resisting disclosure even to those who fervently seek answers. Hanging Rock, a vast and isolated landmark, stands as a symbol of wild, untamed terrain despite attempts to accommodate tourists with picnic areas. When 3 schoolgirls and their governess disappear during an outing to the Rock, the local community confronts its imposing and possibly malevolent existence. Lindsay shows how British colonialism seeks to suppress and erase both nature and Indigenous people. She parallels the repression of nature and Aboriginal Australians with the control exerted over young white females, suggesting a cycle of violence and fear perpetuated by colonial forces. The schoolgirls' restricted interaction with nature reflects colonial anxieties about its power, as they are discouraged from exploring Hanging Rock's surface, significance, or history. Their controlled relationship with nature echoes the broader impulse to tame natural landmarks to assert dominance. Lindsay implies that colonialism breeds repression, evident in the strict control imposed on the girls by Mrs. Appleyard and other authority figures. While the girls' repression pales in comparison to the brutality inflicted on Aboriginal Australians. Lindsay suggests that colonialism necessitates not only the oppression of the displaced but also the repression of those it claims to protect. The tragic events surrounding Hanging Rock may be a consequence of colonialism's oppression. Lindsay implies that nature may enact a form of retribution against colonialist forces or that societal rebellion and systemic failures could lead to a reckoning. The township of Mount Macedon in 1900 was inhabited by a diverse mix of settlers, including poor farmers, affluent English immigrants, potential heiresses, and orphaned girls. Mrs. Appleyard, the headmistress of Appleyard College, shows favoritism towards wealthy students like Irma Leopold, whose financial contributions helped sustain the school, while treating less affluent students, such as Sarah Wayborn, with harshness and neglect. Lindsay portrays Appleyard College as a microcosm of England's rigid class structure, with wealth and social status dictating relationships. Mrs. Appleyard, driven by her own desire for social acceptance and financial stability, perpetuates class divisions and favoritism among her students, prioritizing appearances and monetary concerns over genuine care for their well-being. Similarly, at the Lakeview estate, the Fitzhubert family represents the entrenched class distinctions of English nobility, showing little regard for their community or servants. Even when Irma Leopold, a wealthy heiress, is found, the Fitzhuberts focus on her monetary value rather than her personal welfare, highlighting their obsession with maintaining their social status. In contrast, Albert Crendall represents a departure from the obsession with social advancement, finding contentment in his simple life, exemplified by his friendship with Mike Fitzhubert. Lindsay suggests through Albert's character that true fulfillment may lie in surpassing societal divisions rather than wealth and status. Hanging Rock, an ancient volcanic formation, held sacred significance for local Aboriginal Australian tribes long before the arrival of white settlers. However, colonialism changed it into a tourist destination and picnic spot, stripping away its spiritual essence. In Picnic at Hanging Rock, the Hanging Rock symbolizes mysticism, with its ancient presence evoking bizarre sensations among people, as on the senior missing girls. Mike enduring the police investigation. Although its powers remain mysterious, the rock exerts a profound influence on those nearby, representing forces beyond human comprehension. It serves as a reminder of the dangers of the Australian outback and the impact of British colonialism on nature. The threatening presence of Hanging Rock deeply affects Mrs. Appleyard, whose distress over the disappearances leads her to tragic self-destruction. The rock becomes a symbol of warning, reflecting colonialism's malevolence and nature's retaliatory forces. It embodies the unseen powers of mysticism and serves residue of colonialism's pervasive threats, reverberating throughout the novel as a reminder of its dark legacy. Hope you share and subscribe for more videos.